Speaker of the Fijian Parliament, Honourable Dr. Jiko Luveni, Honourable Members of Parliament, facilitators from the Fiji Women's Crisis Centre, Permanent Secretary and staff of the Ministry, Parliament Secretariat staff, a very good afternoon to you all. It's a great pleasure for me to warmly welcome each and every one of you to this very important gender relations, domestic violence, and human rights training for members of Parliament in 2018. Your collective presence here today, even though I wish there were more of us here today, it highlights the importance of the topic of discussion to our national Parliament, and to have this occasion graced by none other than the Honourable Speaker speaks volumes of where our Parliament places the topic of gender and this very challenging topic of gender-based violence in Fijian society. We are thankful also to our partners, the Parliament Secretariat, Fiji Women's Crisis Centre, UNDP and UN Women, for the continued support to the various programs run by the Ministry for the empowerment of women and gender equality in Fiji. We are also very extremely honored, Honourable Speaker, to have you here with us to formally open this workshop. The Honourable Speaker, we would all know, has been very instrumental in promoting women's rights and empowerment in Fiji as the former Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation. It was under her visionary leadership that Fiji saw mammoth achievements in the area of women's development with the implementation of initiatives such as the first Fiji National Women's Expo, the launch of the National Gender Policy, and of course the Zero Tolerance Violence-Free Community Initiative. Without further ado, I welcome you all once again and welcome Madam Speaker to this official opening of this workshop, and I invite you, ma'am, to deliver your opening address.
Thank you, the Honourable Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, Honourable Members of Parliament, the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, and members of staff, very familiar faces, the Coordinator for Fiji Women's Crisis Centre, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Honourable Ministers and Honourable Members of Parliament, I thank you for your interest and support in this important training event, and also for inviting me to address you this afternoon. I must also thank the very inspiring devotion that was shared with us this afternoon. Thank you so much. I must at the outset thank all the Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation, the Fiji Women's Crisis Centre for their support to enable the conduct of this event. As we are aware, parliaments are evolving constantly, reflecting changes in society. With respect to the theme of this training, members of parliaments are guardians of human rights by virtue of your essential and oversight responsibilities to ensure respect for human rights. Parliaments must assume these responsibilities by protecting the rights of members, by providing information, knowledge, and training to enable them to take an active part in human rights promotion and protection. While the increase in the number of women into Parliament is beneficial for representative democracy, it has tended to disrupt the established order, provoking some resistance. Comparatively, we are fortunate here in Fiji that this experience is minimal, but it should not nurture complacency in the protection of women parliamentarians. The recent IPU study on gender-sensitive parliaments highlighted the fact that by entering the political domain, women are shifting away from a role that confined them to the private sphere and are entering a world where their legitimacy is sometimes challenged. Such resistance can take different forms, such as sexist remarks, intimidation, or harassment. Directed against women in politics, such behavior is particularly troubling. It might once have been considered something one had to deal with, or just part of politics. But today, throughout the world, women as well as men are increasingly calling it unacceptable and having no place in political culture. The United Nations Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women defines such violence as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. Such violence affects one of every 3 women in the world. It may be physical, sexual, psychological, or economic in nature, and no society, culture, or socioeconomic class is immune to it. According to the conceptual work done by the National Democratic Institute, three characteristics distinguish violence against women in politics. 1, it targets women because of their gender. 2, in its very form, it can be gendered, as exemplified by sexist threats and sexual violence. And 3, its impact is to discourage women, in particular, from being or becoming active in politics. Such violence clearly constitutes a violation of human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the obligation to ensure that women can participate in political processes fully, freely, and in all security, as enshrined in several international instruments, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the Beijing Platform for Action, and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Gender-based violence is not about women only, it is about men in particular, because 85% of the perpetrators are men, as reflected in a recent global study. This shows, of course, that women make a majority of the victims, which is the other, more abhorrent side of the coin. Violence against women parliamentarians is perpetrated in traditional political venues, including parliamentary offices, constituency offices, political meetings, and the newer arenas created by social media. The perpetrators of such acts of violence are not confined to a certain political adversaries, such is common in cases of political violence, or to the usual contingent of aggressive, dissatisfied, or mentally disturbed citizens. Women parliamentarians can be harassed or attacked by male colleagues in their own parties. They can also be targets of violent behavior by community officials, religious leaders, and members of their own families. It has been reported that women speakers have been raped and, in one case, murdered. You better start doing that to me. Social media has become the #1 place in which psychological violence, particularly in the form of sexist remarks, humiliating images, mobbing, intimidation, and threats, is perpetrated against women parliamentarians. The extent of online harassment was recently confirmed by a study conducted in the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom, showing, to take a notable example, that Hillary Clinton received twice as many tweets containing insults and offensive comments as Bernie Sanders during their campaigns for the Democratic Party nomination. The same was true of Julia Gillard in comparison to Kevin Rudd between January 2010 and January 2014. This phenomenon is part of a rise in cyber violence against women generally, worldwide. 3/4 of female internet users have been exposed to some form of cyber violence. Thank goodness I do not access social media at all, because I just don't know, and I don't want to know. I just get to hear about it sometimes. In particular, when I was sick at one stage and people were surprised to see me back in Parliament 1 week later when I was supposed to be half dead, almost dead. Therefore, recognizing the existence of the problem, naming it and breaking the silence about it opens the way for effective solutions. Such recognition by the government and by parliaments, political parties, parliamentarian citizens, is fundamental. Parliaments and politicians, male and female, must say loud and clear that such behavior has no place in the political culture and will not be tolerated in Parliament. Fiji, as you will hear in this training, already has strong and strictly enforced laws on gender equality and violence against women, and the Fiji Women's Crisis Center is active in their enforcement for effective implementation. The Ministry for Women is also very active in this regard, especially in providing a means for victims or would-be victims to be provided with assistance and support, etc. Allow me to share some experiences in other countries. In 2012, Bolivia adopted a law on harassment and political violence against women, providing for sanctions against any physical, psychological, or sexual aggression or any form of pressure, persecution, harassment, or threat towards a woman elected to or holding public office. Mexico followed this example by amending its laws on violence against women and its electoral legislation to incorporate the definition of acts of political violence against women. In May 2016, the Bolivian law was bolstered by a decision of the Ministry of Justice to prohibit people with backgrounds of violence against women from running for political office. In England in 2014, a man was condemned to 18 weeks of prison for bombarding a female parliamentarian on Twitter with messages characterized by the justice system as indecent, obscene, and threatening. Reporting and calling public attention to online threats and insults through traditional and social media was said by some parliamentarians to produce good results. As I alluded to earlier, the problem is and should be the business of everyone, men and women. Men are an essential component of the solutions to be implemented. They need to be actively involved in the debate and commit themselves fully to the elimination of sexism and discrimination in politics. They need to take a stand and assume the responsibilities alongside women. The establishment of partnerships with civil society organizations and the media is another possible way to denounce unacceptable behavior and encourage public debate on ways to make politics more inclusive. Education is a means of changing mentalities and cultures, combat discrimination, and establish a culture of equality and tolerance has been advocated. Teaching boys and girls from the earliest age about human rights and gender equality will help to establish relations of non-violence and respect between the sexes and sectors, and this should begin in the family. In conclusion, gender-based violence must no longer be viewed as just a price to be paid for political involvement. It is the duty of political actors, men and women, and Parliament as an institution to set the right examples. Parliament must put some order in its own house if it does not wish to help to legitimize discrimination and violence against women in all other spheres of public life as well as private. The vitality of democracy depends to a very large extent on the effectiveness of Parliament to progress gender equality and human rights. I wish you a participatory and interesting training. Thank you.